The bolt had barely clicked into place when the first fist struck the land office door hard enough to rattle glass in its frame. Abel Higgins nearly dropped his key ring. Outside, past the frosted window, three shapes loomed in the blue dusk, breath steaming like smoke off a rifle barrel. He knew trouble when it came knocking, and this was not the polite kind. "Open up, Higgins," a voice called, rough as gravel. "We know you're in there. We only want to look at a record." "Office is closed for the night," Higgins shouted back, though his voice cracked on the last word. "Come back at sunup like decent folk." The answer was another blow to the door, this one from something heavier than a fist, a rifle butt, maybe, or a boot. The old lock groaned. Elvira Turner had been crossing the frozen ruts of Wolf Pass's Main Street with a crate of tack under one arm when she heard the pounding. She stopped in the lantern light, breath fogging, and watched three men crowd the land office stoop. Two carried rifles loose in gloved hands. The third stood a step back, hat brim low, saying nothing, letting the others do his talking, which told her plenty about where the real authority sat among them. She set the crate down without a sound and moved along the boardwalk, keeping to the shadow of the feed store awning. The cold that January had teeth in it, the kind that had already claimed two cowhands out on the Bridger Range and left half the cattle in the territory dead in the drifts, and it bit through her wool coat now as she crept closer. But she did not turn back toward the warmth of her own kitchen. Her father had not raised her to turn back from trouble that smelled like it. "There is no reason for you boys to be scaring an old man half out of his boots," she called out, stepping into the pool of lantern light at the edge of the stoop. The two armed men spun toward her voice. The third, hat brim low, went very still. "This is no business of yours, miss," said the nearer of the two, a heavy-set man with a scar notching one eyebrow. She would later learn his name was Cutter. "Go on home." "It became my business the moment I heard you demanding a record with my family's name on it," Elvira said, and she was surprised at how steady her own voice came out, given the way her heart hammered. She had guessed at the words through the door, but the guess proved true when Cutter's jaw tightened. "Turner," he said, "you'd be the freighter's girl." "I would be Elvira Turner, and that land office holds my father's water claim on Bitter Creek, filed and witnessed proper 2 years back. If you mean to burn it or steal it, you'll have to go through me first, and then through the Marshal, because I expect he is already on his way." She had no notion whether that last part was true. She said it anyway, because a bluff spoken with a straight spine carried further than one spoken with a shaking one. As it happened, the words were barely out of her mouth when boots sounded on the frozen boardwalk behind her, unhurried but certain, and a voice she had heard exactly 4 times before in her life, twice over a sickbed, once at her father's burial, once trading pleasantries outside the mercantile, cut through the cold air. "Evening, gentlemen. Or is it? Hard to tell civility from strangers pounding on an old man's door after dark." Lionel Whitfield came into the lantern light with his coat, collar turned up against the wind, and a badge, small and dull, pinned crooked over his heart. He was not a large man in the way some marshals like to be large, all shoulders and swagger, but he moved like a man who had set enough broken bones and sewn enough wounds to have no illusions left about what violence cost, and that made him steadier than most men twice his size. His eyes found Elvira first, taking her in with a flicker of surprise and something else, something warmer, before he turned them on the 2 armed men. "Marshal," Cutter said, and there was a wariness in the word that told Elvira the man knew Lionel's reputation, at least a little. "You have a name for me, or should I guess it off your knuckles?" Lionel asked pleasantly enough, though his hand had drifted, casual as anything, to rest near the pistol at his hip. "We are only here on business," Cutter said. "Land office business. At gunpoint, in the dark, in weather that will kill a man in 20 minutes if he lies down in it," Lionel said. "That is a peculiar hour to be conducting business, Cutter. I know your face from the Trading Post bar, and I know you do not work for the county." The third man, the one who had stayed silent with his hat brim low, shifted his weight, and for a heartbeat Elvira thought he might speak. He did not. He only tugged the brim lower and stepped back further into shadow, and something about the shape of him, the set of his shoulders, tugged at a memory she could not quite place, though she would have plenty of reason to remember it later. "We'll be going," Cutter said finally, seeing the numbers were not in his favor with a Marshal added to the tally and a woman who did not look inclined to back down. "No harm meant. See that there is none in the future," Lionel said. "Higgins, you may open that door again, once these fellows have found the road." The three men retreated into the dark, boots crunching frozen mud, and within a minute the jingle of harness told of horses being mounted and ridden off toward the north trail, the one that climbed eventually into the high pass. Elvira let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "You are hurt?" Lionel asked her, turning fully now, and the concern in his voice was plain and unguarded in a way that made her feel absurdly warmer despite the cold. "Only my nerves," she said. "Though I expect Mr. Higgins deserves that concern more than I do." The land office door creaked open and Abel Higgins peered out, spectacles askew, a lantern trembling in one hand. "Marshal Whitfield." "Miss Turner, I do not mind saying I have never been so glad to hear a voice in my life." "What did they want with the record?" Lionel asked, stepping up onto the stoop. "They asked after the water claim," Higgins said. "The Turner filing on Bitter Creek. Wanted it handed over or burned. I could not rightly tell which they preferred, only that they wanted it gone from my shelves." Lionel's gaze slid to Elvira, and something passed behind his eyes, not quite recognition, not quite alarm, but the particular stillness of a man doing arithmetic he did not like the sum of. "That claim names me as witness," he said slowly. "I signed it the week your father passed when you filed the transfer." "I remember," Elvira said. "You held my hand steady enough to sign my own name if I recall it right. I was in no state to hold a pen that week." A faint, sad warmth touched his mouth, not quite a smile. "You held it well enough. I only steadied the ink." Higgins ushered them both inside out of the wind, and by the light of two lamps they examined the ledger and the claim itself, the paper soft with handling, her father's careful hand recording the boundaries of the spring-fed water rights that ran through the Turner homestead before joining the greater flow of Bitter Creek downstream toward the settlement that bore its name. Nothing appeared disturbed, nothing missing. But the fact that armed men had come for it at all, on the coldest night of a brutal winter, was a fact none of the three of them could set aside easily. "I will have Higgins keep the ledger under lock, and I will speak to the trading post owner about who those men might answer to," Lionel said, as he walked Elvira home beneath a sky gone hard and bright with stars, the kind of cold clarity that meant the mercury would drop further still before dawn. "You should not be walking alone until I have sorted this." "I have walked alone plenty of winters, Marshal Whitfield," Elvira said, though there was no sharpness in it, only the dry humor of a woman used to managing herself. "Lionel," he said, "if we are to be discussing armed men on your doorstep, I think we might dispense with the formality." "Elvira, then," she allowed, and found she liked the sound of her name in his voice more than she was prepared to admit. They reached the low timber house at the edge of town that had been her father's, and hers now, with the freight barn beside it where 2 draft horses and a sturdy sled waited out the winter between runs. She turned at the door and studied him a moment in the lamplight spilling from her window, this quiet, tired man with a doctor's gentle hands and a marshal's watchful eyes, and felt the small, dangerous stirring of interest she had not permitted herself in the 2 lonely years since her father died. "Thank you for coming when you did," she said. "I am glad I did," he answered, and there was nothing practiced in it at all. He touched the brim of his hat and walked back into the cold, and Elvira stood at her window a long while after, watching his shape recede down the frozen street, before she finally banked her fire and went to bed, turning the strange night over and over in her mind like a stone she could not quite place. The sickness came on slow, the way trouble in a hard winter often did, creeping in sideways before anyone called it by its proper name. It began with old Tom Bridger's cattle, A dozen head found stiff in a coulee 2 miles above his home place, foam crusted at their mouths, though the water hole they had drunk from showed no ice damage or drowning to explain it. Tom rode into Wolf Pass 3 days after the land office trouble, half frozen himself, to fetch Lionel out to look at the rest of his herd before they went the same way. Elvira happened to be loading her sled with flour and salt pork, bound for Elkhorn Flat, when she saw Lionel come out of his little clapboard surgery with his black bag and his heaviest coat, saw the gray exhaustion already carved into his face, though the day had barely begun. "You will freeze solid before you reach the Bridger place riding that horse in this wind," she told him, without preamble, the way she said most things. "I have made colder rides," he said. "Not faster than my sled you have not. I am bound that direction myself, near enough. Climb up before you talk yourself out of good sense." He looked at her a moment, weighing pride against practicality, and practicality won, as it generally did with him. He climbed onto the sled beside her, and they rode out together into a wind that stung any bare skin it found and turned the breath of the 2 big draft horses into twin white banners streaming back over their withers. At the Bridger place they found 4 more cattle down, and Sarah Bridger, Tom's youngest, curled feverish and vomiting in the back room, her mother wringing her hands over a basin of water drawn that very morning from the well. Lionel knelt at the child's side with the calm, unhurried competence of a man who had done this 100 times in 100 back rooms across 3 settlements, and Elvira found herself fetching water and cloths without being asked, falling into an easy rhythm alongside him, as though they had worked together for years instead of hours. "The water," Lionel said quietly, after he had gotten a dose of ipecac and charcoal into the child and settled her breathing. "Where does your well draw from, Mrs. Bridger?" "Same spring as always off the creek bend," she answered. "Never troubled us before. May I see it?" They walked out together, the 3 of them, to the wellhead, and Lionel drew up a bucket and studied the water in the gray daylight, sniffed at it, even touched a careful finger to his tongue before spitting it out with a grimace. "Bitter," he said. "Bitterer than creek water ought to be, even with the alkali flats upstream." "You think the water did this," Elvira said, "not some sickness carried on the wind." "I think," Lionel said carefully, "that I have now seen 4 cases of the same complaint in 2 days, from 2 different homesteads that share no well but share the same creek, and I do not believe in coincidence that convenient in the dead of winter, when nothing is blooming and nothing has spoiled that I can find." It was the first thread of the larger tangle, though neither of them yet guessed how far it ran. Over the following week, the pattern repeated itself up and down the length of Bitter Creek, from the Bridger spread down through 2 smaller homesteads and into the edge of the settlement that shared the water's name. Cattle sickened. A trapper's dog died convulsing. An old woman in Bitter Creek Township went blind in the space of 2 days after drinking a tonic sold at the trading post to settle her stomach, a tonic Lionel confiscated and would not let anyone else touch once he had examined the bottle himself, his face gone tight and grim in a way Elvira had not yet seen on him. "Wood alcohol," he told her. The 2 of them huddled over his surgery table by lamplight, while outside the wind screamed around the eaves of Wolf Pass, and the thermometer nailed to his door frame read 11 degrees below what any sane man would call comfortable. Cut into the tonic to stretch it further, most likely. Some fool trying to squeeze more bottles from less real medicine. It will blind a body or kill them outright, and I have now 3 cases of it besides the water sickness, and I confess I do not know which threat frightens me more, only that both are spreading faster than I can ride to meet them. He looked in that moment like a man carrying the whole territory on shoulders never built wide enough for it, and something in Elvira's chest ached to see it. "You cannot be everywhere at once," she said. "Elkhorn Flat, Pine Hollow, Bitter Creek, and Wolf Pass besides, and you the only doctor between here and the railhead 200 miles south. Let me help carry what I can. My sled goes where a horse alone cannot, through drifts that would swallow a rider whole, and I know every trail between these settlements better than most men who were born to them. I cannot ask that of you. You are not asking. I am offering, which is a different thing entirely, and one you have no authority to refuse, Marshal, seeing as I am not one of your deputized citizens. That drew, finally, the ghost of a real smile from him, tired as it was. No, he agreed. You are not that. Very well, Elvira Turner. If you will haul my black bag through drifts no sensible man would attempt, I will not turn away help I am plainly in need of. And so began the strange, exhausting, oddly tender weeks that followed, the two of them crossing the frozen plains together beneath skies the color of old pewter. Elvira's sled runners hissing over crusted snow, while Lionel dozed fitfully against a crate of bandages between calls, waking each time they crested a rise to ask, without fail, whether she was warm enough, whether her hands had gone numb on the reins, whether she needed him to spell her driving, though they both knew she handled the team better than he ever could. They told themselves, and told anyone who asked, that the arrangement was temporary, only until the sickness passed, only until he could hire a proper assistant come spring. But temporary things have a way of settling into the shape of something else entirely when two lonely people are thrown together against a hostile world, and neither of them was blind to the way. The arrangement had begun to feel less like an emergency, and more like the only part of either of their days that made sense. The frozen river nearly took her, 3 weeks into that arrangement, on a run to Pine Hollow. She had gone ahead of Lionel to scout the crossing at Widow's Ford, where the creek narrowed between two stands of cottonwood, and the ice usually held firm enough for a laden sled, while he finished a call at a homestead a mile back. She was midway across, testing the surface with the long pole she carried for the purpose, when the ice gave beneath her with a crack like a rifle shot, and the black water closed over her boots, her knees, dragging at her skirts with a cold so absolute it stole the scream right out of her throat. She heard Lionel's shout before she fully understood what had happened, heard hooves pounding, and then he was there at the broken edge, flat on his belly across the unbroken ice, reaching for her with both hands locked around a length of harness strap. Grab hold, Elvira, I have you, grab hold and do not let go. She caught the strap with fingers already gone clumsy and stupid with cold, and he hauled, cursing under his breath in a way she would tease him about later, once the terror had passed, dragging her up onto the solid ice inch by agonizing inch until she lay gasping and soaked beside him, her whole body beginning the deep, uncontrollable shiver that told them both how little time they had. We need fire now, not in an hour, he said, already stripping his own coat to wrap around her over her sodden clothes, already half carrying her toward the cottonwoods where deadfall promised kindling. He worked with a speed and economy that spoke of a man who had lost patience to exposure before, and would not lose this one, striking flint against steel with hands that shook only slightly, feeding the small flame with dry bark shaved from beneath the bark's outer layer until it caught and grew. You will have to get out of those wet things, he said, not looking at her, busying himself with the fire, giving her what privacy the circumstance allowed as she peeled off her ruined dress behind the wide trunk of a cottonwood and wrapped herself in the blanket he passed around without meeting her eyes, in his shirt sleeves now himself, his own coat gone to her. When she was decent again, wrapped close to the fire, he finally allowed himself to look at her properly, and what she saw in his face was not the professional concern of a doctor assessing a patient but something rower, something that had been building unspoken through 3 weeks of shared cold and shared purpose. I thought the ice had taken you, he said quietly. I have pulled men from that river before. Not all of them came up talking. I am hard to kill, Lionel Whitfield, she said, though her voice shook with more than cold. You will have to try harder than a little ice. He laughed, a short, startled sound, and reached out to brush a strand of half-frozen hair back from her face, his fingers lingering a moment longer than the task required, warm against her cheek despite the cold that still clung to them both. "I do not intend to try at all," he said. "I intend, if you will permit it, to keep you exactly as safe and exactly as alive as I am able, for as long as you will let me." She did not answer in words. She only turned her face slightly into his palm, and for a long moment neither of them moved, the fire crackling between them and the frozen creek murmuring beneath its broken shell nearby, and something settled between them that neither was yet ready to name aloud, though both felt its weight all the same. It was 3 days after that, warmed and dried and none the worse for the dunking beyond a lingering cough, that Elvira found the barrels. She had taken her sled up a spur trail above Bitter Creek that she rarely used, a shortcut her father had shown her years before that cut through a stand of lodgepole pine before rejoining the main track. And there, in a hollow screened by the trees, she found 3 wooden barrels, half buried in drifted snow, staved in at the top as though someone had been dipping from them regularly. She climbed down and brushed the snow from one enough to read the brand burned into its side. A stylized W over a crossed pick and shovel, the mark, she knew from handling freight bills for years, of a small claim registered upstream under the name E. Whitfield. She stood there a long moment in the cold, the pieces beginning, slowly and sickeningly, to arrange themselves in her mind. Whitfield. Not so common a name in a settlement this size. She thought of the third man outside the land office, silent, hat brim low, and the way something about his shape had tugged at memory she could not place, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She brought the barrel stave back to Lionel that evening, laid it on his surgery table between them, and watched his face very carefully as she spoke. "There is a claim upstream from Bitter Creek registered to an E. Whitfield," she said. "Any relation to you, Marshal?" The silence that followed told her everything before his mouth ever opened. "My brother," Lionel said finally, not meeting her eyes, his voice gone flat and careful in a way she had never heard from him. "Emmett. He came back to the territory this past autumn after our mother passed. He has a small claim up past the fork, placer mining mostly, nothing that should touch the creek proper." "This barrel says otherwise," Elvira said. "And I think you already suspected as much, Lionel, because I have watched you these 3 weeks ride yourself half to death chasing a sickness whose source sat this close the whole time, and I have never once heard you speak your brother's name until I said it first." "I did not know," he said, too quickly, and then more honestly after a breath, "I did not want to know. There is a difference, and I am ashamed to say I have been living inside that difference for weeks now, telling myself there was still an innocent explanation, that Emmett could not have done such a thing knowing what it cost. And now I no longer have that comfort to hide behind," he said, and the anguish in his voice was plain enough that she believed him, believed that whatever failure of nerve had kept him from acting sooner, it had not come from cruelty, only from a wound she had not known he carried. "I will go to him. I will make him stop and answer for what he has done. Let me come with you." "No." The word came out harder than she expected, and he seemed to hear it himself, softening at once. "Not because I doubt you, Elvira. Because I do not yet know what I will find in him, or what he might do if cornered, and I could not bear it if my failure to handle my own family cost you anything at all." She let him go alone that night, though every instinct in her rebelled against it, and she would come, in time, to regret that concession more than almost anything else in the whole hard winter. He did not arrest his brother that night. He did not arrest him the next night either, nor the one after that. Instead, over the following 2 weeks, Elvira began to notice small things that gathered like snow before an avalanche. Lionel riding out alone after dark toward the northern trail, returning hollow-eyed and silent. A report he filed with the Territorial Land Office naming a drifter, a peddler called Jedediah Cole who sold patent remedies from a wagon, as the likely source of the tainted tonic, despite the fact that Elvira herself had seen the bottles came from stock kept in the trading post cellar, not from any wagon Cole drove. And worst of all, A night she came upon Lionel, and a shape she now recognized, even in darkness, as Emmett Whitfield, standing close together behind the livery barn, Lionel's voice low and urgent, pressing something into his brother's hand that caught the moonlight with the dull gleam of coin. She did not confront him that night. She went home instead and sat a long while at her kitchen table with her father's old ledger book open before her, unseeing, turning over in her mind the terrible shape of what she now understood. That Lionel Whitfield, the Marshal sworn to protect Wolf Pass and every scattered soul depending on the pass road, had known his own brother poisoned the water and the medicine both, had known an innocent man stood accused in his place, and had chosen, again and again, to shield the guilty rather than see justice done. She thought of the man who had pulled her from the freezing creek, who had held her face in his cold, numbed hand and promised to keep her safe, and felt something in her chest crack clean down the middle, grief and fury tangled together so tightly she could not tell where one ended and the other began. She spent the next 3 days gathering what proof she could, moving carefully, saying nothing to Lionel of what she had seen. She rode to the land office and had Higgins pull the original mining claim filed under Emmett Whitfield's name, cross-referenced against freight manifests she kept in her own barn from goods hauled to the trading post over the autumn, manifests that showed shipments of grain alcohol far exceeding what any legitimate business could account for, alcohol that could be cut with the cheaper, deadlier wood variety and stretched into tonic bottles sold at a healthy profit. She found, tucked at the back of the land office's oldest ledger, a survey map showing Emmett's claim sat directly upstream of the spring that fed both the Bridger place and the Turner water rights her own father had staked years before, close enough that any tailings or runoff dumped carelessly or deliberately would flow straight down into the drinking water of half the valley. She found, too, speaking quietly with the peddler Jedediah Cole himself, who sat under informal watch at the back of the trading post, awaiting a territorial marshal's ride out to formally charge him, that the man had never sold a bottle of tonic laced with anything more dangerous than bitter herbs and cheap whiskey, and that he had told Lionel as much, repeatedly, only to be waved off, and told the matter was under investigation. "He knows I am innocent," Cole told her, an old man with kind, frightened eyes and hands that trembled now from more than cold. "I have seen it in his face, miss. But he will not say so out loud, and I do not understand why a man sworn to justice would let another take a rope meant for someone else's crime." Elvira understood well enough. She simply could not yet forgive it. The town meeting had been called for Sunday, ostensibly to discuss provisions for the remainder of the brutal winter and the state of the pass road before the spring thaw. But word had spread through Wolf Pass all week that the real business would be Jedediah Cole, and what ought to be done with a man some now called a poisoner outright. Deacon Whitcomb, who ran the trading post and served as the closest thing the settlement had to a mayor, had scheduled the gathering in the trading post's main hall, the only room in town large enough to hold the whole community when the weather kept everyone within walking distance rather than scattered across the plains. Elvira arrived with a leather satchel under her arm, her father's ledger and the survey map and the freight manifests all bundled inside it, and took a seat near the back, her heart hammering harder than it had even on the night of the broken ice. The hall filled slowly, stamping snow from boots, breath clouding in air only barely warmed by the great iron stove at the room's center. Lionel stood near the front beside Deacon Whitcomb, his badge pinned straight for once, his face composed into the careful neutrality of a lawman about to deliver news he did not relish. Jedediah Cole sat on a bench to one side, flanked loosely by 2 men Whitcomb had deputized for the occasion, his hat in his lap and his eyes fixed on the floorboards. "Folks," Whitcomb began, once the room had settled, "we are gathered on account of the sickness that has plagued Bitter Creek and beyond this past month, and on account of the tonic that has cost old Mrs. Purcell her sight and nearly cost young Sarah Bridger her life. Marshal Whitfield has conducted his investigation and has a recommendation for how we ought to proceed regarding the man believed responsible. Lionel cleared his throat. Elvira watched him, watched the way his hands, usually so steady, gripped the edge of the table before him. The evidence I have gathered points to contaminated stock sold through Mr. Cole's wagon, he began, and the words came out stilted, rehearsed, wrong in a way only someone who had heard him speak honestly 100 times over the past month could have detected. I recommend he be held for the territorial marshal's arrival and tried according to law. That is a lie. The words left Elvira's mouth before she had fully decided to speak them, but once loosed they could not be called back, and she found herself rising from the bench, satchel in hand, every eye in the hall swinging toward her. "Miss Turner," Whitcomb said, startled. "This is not the moment for—" "This is exactly the moment," Elvira said, walking forward now down the narrow aisle between the benches, her boots loud on the plank floor in the sudden, total silence. "Because an innocent man sits accused while the marshal charged with finding the truth has known for weeks who is truly responsible, and has done nothing but shield him. Elvira." Lionel's voice was low, urgent, almost pleading, and it was the first time she had heard real fear in it, not for himself, she understood even then, but for what was about to happen to the fragile trust he had spent his whole career building in this valley. "I have proof," she said, and set the satchel down on the table before Whitcomb, drawing out first the survey map, then the manifest, then the ledger, laying each in turn before the assembled town like a hand of cards no one wanted to see but everyone needed to. "This claim, staked upstream of the very spring that feeds Bitter Creek and my own family's water rights, belongs to Emmett Whitfield, the marshal's brother. I have seen barrels bearing that claim's brand hidden in the hollow above the fork, staved in and clearly in use. I have seen freight manifests showing grain alcohol shipped in quantities no honest business could account for, alcohol easily cut with wood spirits to stretch cheap tonic into deadly poison. And 3 nights past, I saw Marshal Whitfield himself meeting his brother behind the livery under cover of darkness, passing him money, and I have heard nothing since suggesting any arrest was ever intended." The hall erupted into a confusion of voices, gasps, someone's chair scraping back hard enough to fall. Deacon Whitcomb stared down at the papers before him, his face going pale as he traced the survey lines with one shaking finger. Jedediah Cole lifted his head for the first time, disbelief and dawning hope warring across his weathered features. "Is this true?" Whitcomb demanded, turning to Lionel. "Marshal, is this true?" Lionel stood very still for a long moment, and Elvira watched something break loose behind his eyes, some final wall giving way after weeks of holding against a flood it could never truly contain. "It is true," he said, and his voice, when it came, was quiet, and it carried through that silent hall better than any shout could have. "Emmett is my brother. I discovered his claim's proximity to the contaminated spring near 3 weeks past, and I discovered, shortly after, evidence that he had indeed been dumping tailings into the water and cutting grain alcohol with wood spirits to stretch his stock at the trading post cellar, where he has been selling tonic under an arrangement with the previous owner before I ever pinned this badge to my coat." A murmur ran through the crowd, ugly and rising. "I went to him," Lionel continued, forcing the words out now, each one costing him visibly. "I meant to make him stop, to make him leave the territory quietly, to spare our mother's memory the shame of a trial, for she died not 4 months past believing him a changed man, and I could not bear, in my grief, to be the one who proved her wrong before the whole world. I told myself no one else need suffer if I could only make him go. I was wrong. People kept drinking that water. People kept buying that tonic. And I let an innocent man sit accused rather than admit what I had done, because I did not know how to face this room and say I had failed the only duty that matters more than blood." The silence that followed was worse than the shouting had been. You let Sarah Bridger nearly die, Elvira said into that silence, her voice shaking now with an anger that had been building for days. And you let Mrs. Purcell go blind, and you let this man, she gestured to Cole, sit here waiting on a rope, all so you would not have to arrest your own brother. I pulled you from nowhere, Lionel Whitfield. I trusted you with my own life on that frozen creek. And you let me believe every single day since that you were the man riding out to save this valley, when you were also the man protecting what was killing it. I know, he said, and there was no defense in it, only a raw, naked grief that made her chest ache even through her fury. I know what I have done and what it has cost, and I do not ask your forgiveness for it, Elvira, because I have not yet earned the right to ask for anything from you. But I am done protecting him. I should have been done weeks ago. Whitcomb rose, his face hard now with the particular fury of a man who had trusted another man's office and found it hollow. Marshal Whitfield, in light of this, I must ask you to surrender your badge to the town council, pending a full accounting. Lionel unpinned the badge without hesitation, without argument, and set it on the table beside the ledger and the survey map, the small metal star looking suddenly very insignificant against the weight of what it had failed to prevent. I will take a party out to Emmett's claim myself, Whitcomb said. Someone ride for the deputized men at the trading post door banged open before he could finish, letting in a blast of Arctic air, and a young man Elvira recognized as one of the boys who kept watch on the pass road for approaching wagon trains, his face white with cold and something worse. "Rider coming down off the northern trail," he gasped. "Fast. And there's smoke up past the fork, black smoke, like something's burning." Elvira felt the floor tilt beneath her. Emmett Whitfield, cornered by whatever word had already reached him of the town meeting, or simply panicking as men in his position often did when the walls closed in, had apparently decided that if he could not escape the consequences of his crimes quietly, he would ensure there was as little evidence, and perhaps as few witnesses, left standing as possible. "The supply train," someone in the crowd said suddenly, remembering. "The Elkhorn Flat train is due through the pass today, isn't it, with the Hendricks family and the new schoolteacher aboard? They'll be crossing the trestle bridge above the fork within the hour." Lionel's face, already pale with the shame of confession, went ashen with a different fear entirely. If Emmett means to burn evidence or cover his escape by taking the pass road north, and that train is crossing the same bridge, he did not finish the thought. He did not need to. Everyone in that hall understood, in the space of a single terrible breath, that whatever quiet reckoning had been meant to follow this meeting, there was no more time for it. True danger, the one that had been building under the surface of this whole hard winter, had finally come to a head at the one place in the valley where it could do the most damage. The trestle bridge over Bitter Creek Gorge, the single crossing point on the only road through Widow's Notch, the pass that connected Wolf Pass and all its scattered settlements to the rest of the territory. "I am going after him," Lionel said, already moving toward the door, badge left behind on the table, coat snatched from its peg. "You have no authority now," Whitcomb called after him. "You surrendered your badge not 2 minutes past." "I am not going as Marshal," Lionel said, turning back just long enough to meet the room's eyes, and Elvira's most of all. "I am going as the man responsible for this, to stop my brother before that bridge takes innocent lives on top of everything else he has already cost this valley. I will not ask any man here to follow me, since I have given you no reason left to trust my judgment. But I am going, with or without the badge." "I am coming with you," Elvira said, snatching up her own coat from the bench where she had left it, her satchel abandoned now on the table, its evidence already having done its terrible, necessary work. "Elvira, do not tell me no again, Lionel Whitfield. You told me no once already and I let you go alone, and I have regretted it every day since. I know that mountain road better than any man in this hall. I know the shortcuts through the pine stand that will save us 20 minutes over the main trail, and I know exactly how to handle a sled team at speed over ice, which you, by your own admission on that frozen creek, do not. You need me, and this time I am not asking permission." Something in his face, even amid the wreckage of the last 10 minutes, softened at that. A flash of the same warmth that had passed between them beside the fire after the ice broke. "Then, let us not waste any more time arguing about it," he said. Whitcomb hesitated only a moment longer before calling out to the hall at large. "Any man willing to ride, saddle up. We will need hands at that bridge regardless of what any of us believe about the Marshal's conduct, because there is a wagon train of families due to cross it inside the hour." Not everyone moved. Some sat frozen in shock or lingering anger, unwilling yet to extend trust to a man who had so recently confessed his failure before them all. But a dozen or more did rise, reaching for coats and rifles, old Tom Bridger among them, his jaw set hard with the memory of his own dead cattle and his daughter's near miss. And even Jedediah Cole, freed now of suspicion, pushed stiffly to his feet to join them, saying only that he had a debt to settle with whoever had nearly cost him his neck. The town, in its ragged, imperfect way, was choosing sides, and Elvira allowed herself, even amid the fear clawing at her chest, one small flicker of hope at the sight of it. They took her sled, the fastest thing on runners in the whole valley, cutting up through the pine spur trail she had found the barrels along weeks before, the same shortcut that had once revealed Emmett's guilt, now serving to close the distance toward wherever he had fled. Lionel sat beside her, rifle across his knees, his face set in the grim, focused calm of a man who had decided, finally and completely, which duty outweighed which loyalty. "I am sorry," he said, as the horses labored up the steep grade, snow flying from beneath the runners. "For all of it. For every day I let you believe I was only what you saw on the surface, when underneath I was carrying something rotten I did not have the courage to cut out." "You have courage enough now," she said, eyes fixed on the trail ahead, though her voice softened despite herself. "It is a poor time to discuss forgiveness, Lionel, with a bridge full of families riding toward disaster. Let us survive the day first." "Fair enough," he said, and reached over just briefly, to squeeze her gloved hand where it gripped the reins, a small gesture that said more than any lengthy apology could have. They crested the last rise above Bitter Creek Gorge in time to see black smoke curling from a small shed near the bridge's northern approach, evidently where Emmett had kept some cache of his supplies, now set deliberately alight, and beyond it, terrifyingly close, the shapes of two loaded freight wagons beginning their slow crossing of the trestle bridge, oblivious to the danger converging on them from both directions. And on the bridge itself, midway across, stood Emmett Whitfield, a coil of fuse cord in one hand trailing back to a small charge lashed against one of the bridge's main support timbers, his face turned toward the approaching wagons with an expression Elvira could not read from this distance, but which she prayed was hesitation rather than resolve. "Emmett!" Lionel's shout tore across the gorge as their sled skidded to a halt at the near approach, both of them scrambling down into the snow. "Emmett, stop. There are children on that wagon." Emmett's head snapped toward them, and for a moment the resemblance between the brothers struck Elvira hard, the same set of the jaw, the same dark eyes, though Emmett's held none of the steady warmth she had come to know in Lionel's, only a wild, cornered desperation. "You told the whole town," Emmett called back, his voice cracking across the wind. "You were supposed to protect me, Lionel. That was the arrangement. I leave quiet, you keep your mouth shut, nobody hangs for anything." "The arrangement was never going to hold, and you knew it as well as I did," Lionel shouted, edging out onto the bridge's near end despite Elvira's hand grasping instinctively at his sleeve. "People were dying, Emmett. A child nearly died. An old woman went blind. You cannot buy that back with a quiet exit north. So instead you'll let them hang me, is that it? Your own brother. I will let the law judge you fair, which is more mercy than you gave anyone drinking from that creek," Lionel said. "But not like this. Not with that charge lashed to a bridge full of families crossing it this very minute. Cut the fuse, Emmett. Whatever else happens today, do not let it happen with more innocent blood on your hands." The lead wagon was perhaps 30 yards from the charge now, the driver oblivious, urging his team faster against the cold, unaware of anything wrong until one of the men behind Lionel, Tom Bridger, Elvira saw, arriving now with the rest of the riders from town, fired a rifle shot into the air and bellowed for the wagons to halt. The sudden crack of the shot seemed to shatter whatever fragile control Emmett had been holding onto. He flinched hard, stumbled a step back on the icy planking, and the fuse cord slipped from his fingers, falling dangerously close to the small flame he had apparently been nursing in a tin cup at his feet to light it. Elvira did not think. She had spent a lifetime handling ropes and reins, and the sudden, split-second decisions that came with managing heavy loads over treacherous ground, and some instinct honed by all those years took over now, faster than fear could stop her. She was past Lionel and out onto the bridge before he could grab her, sliding the last few feet on the ice-slicked planks, and she seized the trailing fuse cord in both hands and yanked it hard away from the flame, hurling it out over the bridge railing into the gorge below, where it fell smoking and harmless into the snow far beneath. Elvira. Lionel's voice cracked with terror as he lunged after her, but the danger of the charge itself had passed, and what remained was only Emmett, wild-eyed and cornered, backing away along the narrowing bridge with nowhere left to run. "It's over, Emmett," Lionel said, reaching them both, positioning himself slightly in front of Elvira without seeming to think about it, an instinct as natural to him as breathing. "The whole town knows now. Whitcomb has men riding to your claim as we speak. There is no quiet way out of this left. There never truly was. I am sorry it took me so long to see that clearly." Emmett's shoulders sagged, the fight going out of him all at once the way it sometimes does in men who have been running only on desperation and find, when finally caught, a strange and terrible relief in having nowhere left to go. "I never meant for anyone to die," he said, his voice small now, almost childlike. "I only meant to stretch a little profit further. It got away from me faster than I meant it to." "Tell that to Sarah Bridger's mother," Lionel said, though not unkindly, only tired, so tired. "Tell it to the territorial judge. That is where this belongs now, Emmett, not on my conscience and not on a bridge full of children." The bridge planking, stressed by the fire's heat against the timber support before Elvira had reached the fuse, chose that moment to groan and shift beneath them, a section near the charge's mounting point sagging with an ominous crack. Emmett, startled, took an unsteady step backward, his boot finding only empty air where the railing should have held, and with a cry he pitched sideways off the bridge's edge, catching himself with both hands on a support beam beneath the planking, dangling now above the frozen gorge with the creek's black water visible far below through a gap in the ice. "Lionel!" Emmett's voice, all pretense of control gone now, was pure animal terror. Lionel did not hesitate. He dropped flat onto the damaged planking, ignoring the fresh groan of protest from the weakened timbers, and reached down over the edge, catching his brother's wrist in both hands the same way he had once caught Elvira's on that frozen creek weeks before. "I have you," he said, teeth gritted with the strain. "I have you, Emmett. I am not letting go. Do you hear me? I am not letting go." Tom Bridger and two other men reached them in the next instant, adding their strength to the effort, and together they hauled Emmett up over the broken edge and back onto solid planking, where he collapsed, shaking, soot-streaked and utterly beaten. The wagons, halted safely well back from the danger, discharged their passengers to watch in stunned silence as Emmett Whitfield was bound with rope by Tom Bridger's steady, unforgiving hands and marched off the bridge to await the territorial marshal's arrival, his crimes now laid bare before the very community he had so nearly poisoned into ruin. Lionel remained kneeling on the bridge a moment longer, breathing hard, looking down at his hands as though they belonged to someone else. Elvira knelt beside him, her own hands still trembling from the fuse cord's heat and the terror of the last several minutes, and neither of them spoke for a long moment, only breathed together in the bitter cold, alive and spared, and utterly changed by the last hour. You saved that bridge, Lionel said finally. Not I you. You saved your brother even after everything, Elvira said. That took its own kind of courage, Lionel, even if it was not the courage you should have shown weeks ago. I do not deserve your kindness about it. I did not say I was being kind, she said, and there was the faintest ghost of dry humor in it, enough to tell him she was not made of stone, that whatever hurt remained between them had not hardened past all hope of thaw. I said it took courage. Those are different observations. They walked back off the bridge together, past the wagons and the gathered crowd of townsfolk who had come to help, some still watching Lionel with wary, unresolved suspicion, others already softening at the sight of what he had done in these last desperate minutes. The weeks that followed brought their own slow reckoning. The territorial marshal arrived within 4 days, delayed by weather, and took formal custody of Emmett Whitfield to stand trial at the county seat for the poisoning of Bitter Creek's water supply and the adulteration of medicine sold under false pretense, crimes that would earn him a lengthy sentence in the territorial prison, a fate Lionel accepted without protest and without pleading further mercy on his brother's behalf. Jedediah Cole was formally exonerated before the whole town at a second meeting, Deacon Whitcomb reading the declaration aloud with visible relief, and the old peddler wept openly, gripping Lionel's hand in both of his own despite everything, saying only that a man who had finally told the truth, however late, deserved the chance to keep telling it. Elvira, drawing on her father's original survey and her own knowledge of the watershed, helped identify an alternate spring higher up the ridge, clean and untouched by Emmett's tailings, and organized the digging of a new well to serve Bitter Creek Township until the old spring could be properly flushed and tested come the spring thaw. It was slow, cold, brutal work in weather that still tried to kill careless men every week, but it gave the valley something it had sorely needed, a visible, tangible sign that the crisis was ending and that better water, better days lay ahead. The town council, after some debate, appointed Tom Bridger as interim marshal, a role he accepted gruffly but capably, freeing Lionel of any further obligation to divide his attention between law and medicine. But the guilt of the past weeks did not leave Lionel easily, and Elvira watched over the following days as he grew quieter, more withdrawn, throwing himself into medical rounds with a grim, punishing intensity that worried her more than his earlier exhaustion ever had. She found him one evening in early February, the worst of the cold snap finally beginning to break, packing his black bag and a bedroll with far more care and far more finality than a simple round of house calls required. "Where are you going?" she asked, standing in the doorway of his surgery, arms crossed against a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "South," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "There is need for doctors at the railhead settlements, I am told, and I think perhaps Wolf Pass would do better with a man who has not so thoroughly betrayed its trust standing at the center of its affairs." "You are running," Elvira said flatly. "The same as your brother did, only slower and with better intentions dressed over the top of it." That drew his eyes up sharply. "That is not fair. Is it not? You made a terrible choice, Lionel, out of grief and love for a brother who did not deserve either, and you have paid for it. And you stood on that bridge and pulled him back from the edge anyway, and you have spent every day since working yourself half to death trying to make right what you broke. And now, just when this valley is finally beginning to trust you again, you mean to leave it and call that penance, when really it is only fear dressed up as sacrifice. I do not know how to stay and be the man they need, after what they have seen me be," he said, and the rawness in his voice told her this was the true wound beneath everything else. "I do not know how to walk these settlements as their doctor when half of them still look at me and see only the marshal who shielded a poisoner." "Then let them look," Elvira said, crossing the room to stand before him, close enough now that he had to meet her eyes or deliberately avoid them, and he did not avoid them. "Let them look, and let them watch you keep showing up anyway, riding out in weather that would kill lesser men, sitting up nights with fevered children, pulling half-drowned fools out of frozen creeks. That is how trust gets built back, Lionel, not by running to some railhead where no one knows your failures, and therefore no one can ever truly know you either. This valley needs its doctor. Elkhorn Flat needs you. Pine Hollow needs you. I need you, though I confess that is a more selfish accounting than the others. He set down the bag he had been packing slowly, as though setting down a weight he had been carrying so long he had forgotten it could be put aside. You would have me stay, he said quietly, even after everything. I would have you stay because of everything, she said. Because I have watched you be weak, and I have watched you be brave, sometimes within the same hour, and I find I trust the second far more for having witnessed the first honestly, rather than having it hidden from me behind some polished badge. I do not want a man who has never failed, Lionel Whitfield. I want a man who fails and owns it and does the harder, better thing afterward. I believe I am looking at exactly that man right now. He crossed the small remaining distance between them and took her face gently in both hands, the same hands that had pulled her from the ice, that had pulled his own brother back from a fatal fall, that had signed her father's water rights transfer 2 years before in a moment of grief neither of them had known would lead here. I love you, he said simply, without ornament, as though the words had been sitting ready in him for weeks, waiting only for the moment he trusted himself enough to speak them. I think I have loved you since that first night outside the land office, watching you stand your ground against armed men twice your size without so much as a tremble in your voice. I have no right to ask you to build any kind of future with a man who has so recently shown you his worst failing, but I am asking regardless, because I do not know how to imagine my life in this valley without you standing somewhere in the middle of it. I love you too, Elvira said, her voice catching only slightly. I have for weeks, though I confess these last days made it a harder thing to admit than it might otherwise have been. But I did not ride out onto that bridge for a stranger, Lionel, and I did not sit up nights afterward wondering after a man I did not care for. I want this valley, and I want you in it, doing the work only you can do, and I want to be standing beside you while you do it, not watching you ride away toward some quieter shame in another county. He kissed her then, slow and certain, his hand still cradling her face as though she were something precious and hard-won, and she kissed him back with all the relief and hope and stubborn love that had been building through every frozen mile they had traveled together that terrible, transformative winter. Outside, the wind had finally begun to soften, the bitter edge easing at last from air that had held nothing but danger for weeks, and somewhere beneath the frozen surface of Bitter Creek, the water had already begun, slowly, to run clean again. Spring came late to Wolf Pass that year, as it always did in high country beneath a mountain pass. But when it came thoroughly, melting the last hard drifts from the trading post eaves and softening the frozen ruts of the main street into mud that everyone complained about and no one truly minded, since mud meant thaw, and thaw meant survival past the worst winter the valley had seen in a decade. Lionel Whitfield remained the only doctor for 3 settlements and the trading post besides, his rounds no lighter than before but his heart considerably so, riding out now with a lightness in his step that had been entirely absent through the dark months of winter. The community slowly had come back around to him, not because his failure was forgotten, but because Elvira had been right. They watched him show up again and again, in weather fair and foul, at bedsides joyful and grim, and trust rebuilt itself the only way trust ever truly can, through the accumulated weight of 100 small, faithful acts. Elvira kept her father's freight business, expanding it that spring to include a second sled and a hired hand to help manage the growing routes between settlements, her name known now up and down the valley not only as a capable freighter, but as the woman who had stood up in a crowded hall and told the truth when it cost her the most to tell it, and who had ridden out onto a burning bridge without a moment's hesitation to save strangers she had never met. They married in the Trading Post Hall on a mild afternoon in late April, with Deacon Whitcomb presiding and half the valley crowded onto benches still faintly scarred from that winter's terrible meeting, though no one seemed to mind the memory now, transformed as it had been into the place where the truth had finally won out. Jedediah Cole gave Elvira away, since her own father could not, and wept through the whole short ceremony without shame. Tom Bridger, still serving capably as Marshal, stood as witness alongside little Sarah, fully recovered and glowing with health, who scattered wildflowers she had gathered from the first thaw-softened meadow above town. That evening, as the last of the wedding guests drifted home beneath a sky finally soft with the promise of a gentler season, Lionel found Elvira standing alone at the edge of the Trading Post porch, looking north toward the pass where so much had nearly gone so terribly wrong. "Regrets?" he asked, coming to stand beside her, slipping an arm around her waist with the easy familiarity of a man who intended to spend the rest of his life finding excuses to touch her. "Only that it took a poisoned creek and a burning bridge to bring us here," she said, leaning into him. "Otherwise, no, not one. I intend to spend considerably less dramatic years earning the rest of your trust," he said. "Fewer frozen rivers, fewer burning bridges. I have had quite enough excitement to last a lifetime. You are a doctor in a territory that has only just survived the worst winter in memory, married to a freighter who hauls goods over the same treacherous mountain pass twice a week," Elvira said, laughing softly. "I would not count on quiet Lionel Whitfield." "No," he admitted, smiling down at her in the fading light. "I suppose I would not. But I find, strangely, that I do not mind the prospect at all, so long as I am facing it beside you." She reached up and kissed him then, unhurried and certain, with the whole clear sky arching overhead and the mountain pass standing silent and thawing behind them, no longer a place of danger and secrets but simply the road home, and beyond it, the whole wide, hopeful country of the rest of their lives together.